Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of BrainScratch. I'm your host John Lorden, and I know I released another video today that was a bit of a deep dive into the Dior Kuntz newly released report from Klein Investigations, but I wanted to give you another episode, just a good old regular BrainScratch. So I looked into what is known as a bit of an urban legend called Polybius. And Polybius is essentially about a video game that may or may have not existed. And if we just take a look at Google Images, well, first of all, we can see that Bart Simpson is apparently more interested in Triangle Wars than Polybius. It did show up in an episode of The Simpsons, and there's a little joke right at the bottom here about property of US government. And that's going to tie into some of the theories around this a little bit, so we'll get into that. But outside of Bart Simpson, we can see there's screens for it. This looks like a startup screen right here. We can see an actual video game cabinet here for it, and it certainly seems like it does at some level exist. Here's a very interesting picture of two men in black standing around the machine. Once again, it's going to tie into a bit of the story. So let's do a little bit of a dive and see if we can figure this thing out. We're going to start with what I consider the most popular opinion, the crowdsourced information at Wikipedia. So Polybius is an arcade game described as an urban legend which is said to have induced various psychological effects on players. The story describes players suffering from amnesia, night terrors, and a tendency to stop playing all video games. Now that would seriously ruin my life. Around a month after its supposed release in 1981, Polybius is said to have disappeared without a trace. There is no evidence that such a game has ever existed. Polybius is thought to take its name from the Greek historian of the same name, who was known for his assertion that historians should never report what they cannot verify through interviews with witnesses. That's an interesting method, although I have to say, sometimes when you see interviews with witnesses, that information isn't always completely trustworthy, but certainly interesting. The first documented reference to the game was an anonymously authored entry added to the site coinop.org on August 3rd, 1998. The entry mentions the name Polybius and a copyright date of 1981. The author of the entry claims in the description to be in possession of a ROM image of the game and to have extracted fragments of text from it, including copyright 1981 Sinisolution. The remainder of the information about the game is listed as unknown, and its About the Game section describes the, quote, bizarre rumors that make up the legend. So apparently Sinisolution, and I hope I'm saying that right, German brain scratchers, please correct me if I'm wrong on that, is German, and it essentially means something to the effect of like senses deleted or sense deprivation of some kind. And I think that it is clunky. I think, and once again, to my German brain scratchers, please chime in on this. Some people assume that that word was put together, was kind of made up by someone that was just using an English to German translation or dictionary of some kind. But you guys let me know. The story tells of an unheard of new arcade game appearing in several suburbs of Portland, Oregon in 1981, something of a rarity at the time. The game is described as proving popular to the point of addiction, with lines forming around the machines often resulting in fighting over who would play next. The urban legend describes how the machines were visited by men in black who collected unknown data from the machines, allegedly testing responses to the game's psychoactive effects. I don't know if that part really holds up for me, because how would they have any data to collect about the actual psychoactive effects? I think the only thing they could really collect from the machine itself would probably be scoring data or to see how players are responding within certain situations in the game. Unless they have some kind of high-tech government sci-fi sensor that's connected to the person. You know, I guess it's not incredibly far-fetched. My treadmill has sensors on it that if you grip onto them, it can at least read your heart rate. So there's potentially some biological information that could be transmitted via contact but that would be a very special arcade machine. Players supposedly suffered from a series of unpleasant side effects, including amnesia, insomnia, stress, nightmares, and night terrors. I have been stressed by some games, I can tell you for certain. I've definitely experienced that. The story tells of how Polybius players stopped playing video games while one became an anti-gaming activist. So that is kind of the basics of the story, and I've read a bunch of different articles, mostly people debunking the authenticity of this story, and all of them resonate these same points. I believe in one of them that I did bump into information that someone might have killed themselves over this game. But when you think about that story, of course, there was no name attached to it. This is very typical of urban legends. How would you know if they killed themselves because of that game? Did they leave a note saying, you know, Polybius, I can't play enough Polybius, or I don't want to see any more Polybius, I want to die? I mean, just how you would know that the game caused that, I really have no idea. And of course, there's no way to really backtrace that information to figure it out. Interestingly, at, I don't even know how to say this URL name, Imager is kind of how I say it, but I could be completely wrong. Typically it's a website where people post pictures and that you can comment under the pictures. But they have a picture here of Polybius, and they have a download link to Polybius. Now, the thing about this is someone came along and built a game and kind of took all of the stories about what this game was, what this game could do, and they rolled it into a software package that you can download and play for yourself. There's some very interesting things about the gameplay. First of all, compared to games of that time in the early 80s, this game is a bit smarter, I would say, than typical early 80s games. You know, you're thinking of like Pac-Man. People typically think that Tempest had something to do with this legend coming about. It also seems to me that this legend kind of hooks into some of the things that people were probably scared of. You know, video games mind controlling you, or you becoming some kind of zombie because you're playing too much video games. I mean, there's certain social narrative that I hear within this urban legend as well. But here we have someone that's posted a picture of the game that we know was made after the fact, and they have just a note. When I say ruin your life, I mean it. It'll make your life crumble around you. These are some of the things this game can control. Hypersomnia, insomnia, narcolepsy, nightmares, night terrors, somniloquy, I believe, somnambulation. Some of these words, I don't know. I had to look some of them up. Sleep paralysis, hypnagogic recall, hypnopompic recall, disoriented arousal. Most of those that I didn't know related still to sleep patterns of some kind, as in the act of falling asleep or the act of coming out of sleep. Even the one that I found most interesting, disoriented arousal, when I do a search on that, basically a bunch of results come back talking about being sleep drunk. And that's just because those two words occur in that type of information a lot. I didn't find a particular match for disoriented arousal itself. But the theory is that this game can control all those things, and there's kind of a good reason why this person might not know the whole backstory, might think that this is the original ROM cartridge or ROM image that was mentioned in the Wikipedia article and mentioned from other places. Speaking of which, if someone really did have the ROM for this, I'm pretty sure it would be in the wild, because there is nothing to stop someone from copying the data from a ROM image and sharing it with other people. Why, if you were looking into this at all and you had access to that information, why wouldn't you put it on a bulletin board somewhere, share it with others, have them crack into the code, have other people try to recompile it and run it? I'm kind of skeptical of that statement that someone has a ROM image of it out there. On the flip side, if this really was some type of program related to, I'm going to say it, MK Ultra, you'd be surprised. In a lot of the research I did today, in the links below, which you can do for yourself as well, many people bring up MK Ultra and try to associate this to that program. If it was related to some type of secret government operation like that, I don't think they would have let a ROM go in the wild. The story about the machines popping up in arcades and then disappearing quickly might be feasible if it was some type of conspiracy thing like that. Do I really believe in that? I'm not sure. I'm really not sure at this point, because it's also feasible that if it did exist, that there could be a misinformation campaign put out. See, that's the crazy thing about conspiracy theories. Even if you want to get out of them, there's always this trap of the misinformation campaign that can pull you right back in. So, you know, it's one of those things that I look at this information, it's an urban legend. I'm currently treating it as such, but I'm trying to learn more about it and dive into it a bit deeper. I love the comments below here. In particular, I'm too scared to try it. I've seen Lawnmower Man. And there is one more comment down here. Lovingly created by Igor Uspenes, PhD, I believe is what it said. I did a little search on that. That name is in the boot up sequence for the new fake Polybius game that was made. I'm not sure who that person was. I couldn't really find any references to him outside of being associated to that game, but just wanted to put that out there in case you might know who Igor is. So there is an actual website, www.cinesolution.com, that you can come to and you can download the game. I've got a link for it down below. But outside of that, they have several screens talking about the game, how it plays, and they have this one screen showing some screenshots from it. And you can see here, they've actually built a screen into the game where you can turn on these options for hypersomnia, insomnia, narcolepsy. Hey, you can turn on nightmares and night terrors. So the information that's floating out there for people that don't do very deep investigative work, it's very easy for this urban legend to live on, and it certainly does live on. If you do a search on this in Google or in YouTube, you will find tons and tons of information of people covering this. Like I said, in most cases, it's people that are actually debunking the existence of it or trying to debunk the existence of it, but occasionally you bump into one where it seems like people still believe in this thing, which maybe they have a good reason to. Certainly when you make a software package that looks like this and put it out into the wild, some people might bump into it and not really understand what they're looking at. Now, Subliminal's on. From the footage that I've watched, I'll run a little of it in the corner here while I'm talking to you. There is subliminal messaging built into this game, this newer version of Polybius. And some of the messages that it says are things like you would have seen in the film They Live. GamingRebellion.com does a very good write-up on it. Of course, I'm going to include it in the description box below for you. They include this picture, which is supposedly the earliest known picture of it. They come to the assumption that this is likely photoshopped. I tend to agree with them, especially because the logo precisely matches the logo that was created in the game that we know was created after. Not to say that, you know, this picture couldn't be legit and maybe they did their research when they were making their game and they copied the font, but I think it's pretty easy to also flip that around and assume that perhaps someone just pasted that in Photoshop right onto an existing arcade cabinet. They have a good list here of the messages that pop up. No ideas, conform, stay asleep, surrender, do not question authority, submit, consume, honor apathy, and games corrupt. And something that comes up frequently when people are talking about this is seizures. And it's pretty interesting because I had an experience when I was in high school when I went to an arcade and I was watching someone play Dragon's Lair. I loved watching people that know how to play Dragon's Lair because it's such awesome animation. This guy was doing really good playing it, and in the middle, right in the middle of him playing it, he just kind of stiffens up and then falls right over, just like a log. And as soon as he hits the ground, he starts convulsing and shaking wildly. Someone ran up to him, took a wallet and stuffed it into his mouth, and just tried to kind of keep him in place as he was convulsing. And it only lasted I don't know, it seemed like a minute. This is me reaching back in my memory. It might have been even shorter than that. And then the person kind of came back too. But obviously, people having seizures while they play video games is a very, very real thing. But it's not that the games are designed to do that. It is specifically that people are photosensitive, and a lot of games nowadays, if you read the boot up screens, they will sometimes issue warnings about photosensitivity. If it's not in the boot up screen, it's more than likely in the gaming manual. So there is a very real issue about that. But that also kind of puts my mind down the path of, is there a potential use for trying to induce something within someone using light? Can you trigger some type of negative effect on their physiology purely by a pattern or intensity of some type of light wave at them? So I'm going to have a little more information we're going to touch on at the end of this video on that. Another thing we see here is there's a code when you actually start the game that you have to enter to access it. And this ties back to, this is one thing that actually ties to the Greek Polybius, but you need to enter the code essentially spelling Polybius using this very simple type of cryptographic table. So you'll see here it says enter the code to access, and it gives you just enough letters to spell Polybius. And if you look at 35 here, you can check out this, and you go to 3, you go to 5, and you have the P. So it's a very simple method of cryptography. And it was apparently known as the Polybius square. I found a YouTube site called Delusional's Arcade, and published just April 16th of this year, they have a video about Polybius being cited at something called Zapcon 4, which I haven't heard of, but it looks like an arcade con of some kind. And we can see here you've got someone talking and looking at a Polybius arcade machine. And you get a sense of some of the graphics there. Kind of cool looking to me, quite honestly. And the thing that's really interesting about the gameplay, if you watch this video, the guy that actually made the arcade cabinet is there and he talks about it. You're not simply flying that ship up and down and just shooting at everything. There are certain numbers on some of the objects, and there's a number in the center, and the numbers that you shoot into the center affect that number, and apparently you're trying to zero it out. Almost, I guess you could almost think of it as like a game of darts, kind of. So I thought that was really interesting, and if you look back at video games of that time, they didn't really incorporate game mechanics that were that smart. I mean, we all know that this version of Polybius was made more recently, but it's just a very clever and interesting type of gameplay. And quite honestly, it's got me itching to try it out a little bit for myself. Some of the graphics get pretty intense though. If you do watch this video, you'll see when they get to the next level of it. Here we go. There's some pretty psychedelic graphics going on the screen here, and see how it's flashing. Once again, if you're prone to epileptic seizures, I don't think you want to be playing this type of game. I mean, it's flashing and twisting, and there's a lot going on that screen there. But you can check out this whole video for yourself. The guy did a great job on the arcade cabinet. He actually added some vintage stickers to it, like that it's from 1981, it's from a Portland arcade. He has like an MTV sticker on one side. Some pretty cool stuff. I thought he did a really good job, and it was obviously a passion of his. And apparently, once they set this machine up at Zapcon, it gets played like crazy because he had to repair the controller between Zapcon 3 and Zapcon 4. So pretty interesting stuff. Snopes has a little blurb about it. This is on what they call a roundup page, but basically where they take some little story and try to quickly debunk it or or support it, I guess. Here they have a little blurb on Polybius. This game had a very limited release, 1 or 2 backwater arcades in a suburb of Portland. The history of the game is cloudy. There were all kinds of strange stories about how kids who played it got amnesia afterwards, couldn't remember their name or where they lived, etc. The bizarre rumors about this game are that it was supposedly developed by some kind of weird military tech offshoot group, used some kind of proprietary behavior modification algorithms developed for the CIA or something. Kids who played it woke up at night screaming, having horrible nightmares. One additional aspect that will frequently pop up when you see people review this story is the game, I think it's called Battlezone if I remember right, but it's one of a very early tank game. And if you've ever played it, you know it. It's all vector graphics, which means everything is drawn on the screen in lines. Basically, it's a black background with green lines and very simple objects where you're driving a tank and you're trying to shoot other tanks that are sometimes hiding behind pyramids and other objects made out of these lines. Apparently, the US Army approached the game developer to make a version of that for training. So people think, well, hey, look, we can see that there's a relationship between the Army and that game developer. Is it feasible that that game developer had something to do with Polybius, and this is just a next step in, the government working together with game developers to some ends? But to make a simulation for training people on how to drive and control a tank, it's a bit of a stretch going from that to a deep undercover CIA project for controlling and disorienting people. So I don't know how much to put into that. The Snopes angle on it is, this one is just a gag someone invented several years ago, which has now become enshrined on the web. Another version of the conspiracy rumors involving military intelligence agents visiting arcades to collect stored information from game consoles, which date to at least the early 1980s. Back then, we were supposed to watch out for men in black who came around to take down the initials of high scorers at Space Invaders, Asteroids, and Defender. And that kind of reminds me of The Last Starfighter. Do you guys remember The Last Starfighter? Where essentially a video game is put at this little podunk trailer park, and there's someone that is great at the game, and all of a sudden he's recruited and taken to another planet to fight, essentially using the same type of ship that he was playing in the game. Really, really cool story from the 80s. If you're not familiar with it, I highly, highly recommend that you check it out. But it just once again points to this mentality that was going on back then about video games. There was a bit of fear, kind of the normal fear that the general population has about any type of new technology that's kicking up. I think we're starting to see that right now with Pokemon Go and people running into trouble with that, hurting themselves physically and whatnot. There's always this kind of sense twitch reaction from the public whenever something new like this comes out and starts taking time and focus in a new direction. So I don't think that it's so strange that this urban legend was kicked up. But I was curious, and I did do some research into light patterns and what they could possibly induce in people. And just doing a search on light patterns affecting your brain, you will see there is article after article. Light affects your brain like a drug. Blue light has a dark side. And most of these articles are talking about people that use laptops or cell phones in the bedroom before they go to sleep, and how that type of light is actually disrupting their sleep pattern. So there is some precedence. Admittedly, it's a little weak, but especially for the case of insomnia, if that being a trigger on that video game screen that we all saw, yeah, there is some information out there to support the theory that it is potentially true that a video game could affect your physiology in a way where it could impact your sleep patterns, which I'm pretty sure I've had happen to me before, but that was usually because I wanted to keep playing a game instead of going to bed. Outside of that, I did bump into what is called a Dazzler, which is a type of weapon. A Dazzler is a directed energy weapon intended to temporarily blind or disorient its target with intense directed radiation. And basically, it sounds like a flashlight you shine in someone's eyes, and that essentially stops them from being able to do whatever they were going to do next. This Wikipedia article goes into several military applications that are based somewhat on that same principle. It's getting a bit more high-tech now. They're using lasers to try to do this. I didn't realize, but there is an actual law that you cannot build a weapon with a light that would intentionally blind someone. Kind of good to know that that exists. But there are weapons that are designed to momentarily disrupt your vision. So once again, that doesn't really lead to the list that we saw, but all of this is being based on a video game that was made based off of an urban legend. And if someone has that original ROM out there, until they release that information in the wild for everyone to look at and judge for themselves, this is going to stay an urban legend. And I think it's going to keep spinning towards an urban legend that most people, if you do more than just 5 minutes of searching on the internet, find out is not likely true. There's a very strong possibility it's not true. I'm telling you, unless it's that dreaded misinformation campaign thing at work again, which you can never tell. I swear to God, I never know. Thank you so much for joining me on this brain scratch. Admittedly, it's a little bit of a light one. You know, I like throwing those in every now and then. It was really fun for me to look into this topic. There's a couple of other angles I didn't touch on. So there's more for you to research out if you want to. You can start with the links below. I hope you are all having a great Friday. Have an awesome weekend, and I will catch you next week back here on the Geek and Dorks channel. Take care, everyone.